Oh.
Yeah, we are live, but so what we're doing is we're broadcasting live into a closed Facebook group that no one's in right now, so just so that we can decide what to do with this later. Welcome everybody back to the session, and I'm just again just really grateful to Joie Chen for being here. I think we all learned a lot in the morning from Simon. There's a slightly different set of muscles we'll be using today for this session, and just because we're restarting the video, I want to say once more that Joie has been, for many years, one of the most influential and important broadcast journalists, who also is very modest, as you can hear, and she's taken risks in her career, including trying new things, as she did when she went to Jazeera America and put on this amazing newscast that, among many people who I know who watched it on a regular basis, it meant so much to them to have that kind of news being covered here. And she has changed her career herself. She's now director of Medill's Washington program. Some of you might know it's a very big deal because they, as a leading journalism school, understand that, or the leading journalism school, we can debate that. They have understood that the value of not just being in Evanston, Illinois, or New York City, but Washington, D.C., and she lives there, and she's building an exciting, greater program than it already is. And again, for the sake of the introduction here, just to tell everybody that Joie changed my life by encouraging me to step out of my cocoon and very comfortable, semi-dull life at Columbia University and try something new. And everything that's happened since then has been because of Joie's insistence that I try something new. And we didn't know each other. I mean, we knew of each other, but she wrote to me out of the blue. And so it shows you people can change your lives even though you're not directly connected. And now we feel very close and very connected, and we talk not enough, but we will continue to cheer each other on as we go forward. And so when she heard I had this new life, she offered to come up and spend some time and say, how can I help you? And I said, this is how you can help. Share what you're doing and what you've learned. And that's why she's here today. So once more, please give it up for Joie Chen.
It's way too big an introduction. I'm a very small person. Sree made mention of it. I never assumed that people know about my history, so I'm just going to give you a couple plus points in the course of my career. I was an anchor at CNN for 10 years. I was in the front row of the White House for CBS News for 6 years, on and off. And I kept doing stuff as well for them in Washington, and then I hosted this program on Al Jazeera America. But in between, I've done a number of other projects, largely in branded content. And so I think this is actually a new arena for a lot of us who grew up in big J journalism, and it's something I'm very interested in talking about, but not what I'm talking about here today, so I'll cut myself off on that front. What I would say is very often people ask, how does somebody get on television? How did you become a person on television? And I would say that, of course, a large number of people try to get on television, and that's how they end up on television. That's it. Seems reasonable. They go to school, they expand their skills base, and they get jobs and try to be on TV. I, on the other hand, tried very hard not to be on TV because I am a naturally socially awkward person. I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of actually having to look people in the eye and speak to them. And I started out being even more uncomfortable with that. And I think part of the reason is actually quite cultural. I was raised by two Asian immigrant parents, both of whom were tremendous and upstanding role model figures. But one thing they really emphasized is the importance of fitting in and not being the nail that sticks out the board. Even in their lifetime, I had a relatively successful career on television. I always thought they were both a little embarrassed by it because it involved being too public a figure, and they would have preferred that I perhaps stay a little lower. Although both of them were scientists and involved in medical schools, and they both said early on, you need to find something else to do because you're not smart enough to be a doctor. So thus, I was compelled into journalism. But I really thought I was going to be an off-camera person. I really at first thought I was going to be a newspaper reporter. I got out of school at a time where there were not many jobs in newspaper journalism. My advisor sent me back to graduate school and said, be on TV, because there's only Connie Chung, and you could be the next Connie Chung. But I really, even at that point, still didn't think I was going to be on the air. I wanted to be an off-camera producer. I wanted to be an executive producer. I actually wanted to grow up to run 60 Minutes. I have had a series of failures in my career, which culminated in my not being the executive producer of 60 Minutes, but it's turned out okay in other ways. What I would say is, the business of performance in these kinds of platforms has changed over time. So that things that we expected to learn as television news presenters has changed. Things used to be fairly programmed. But now, in the rise of many different kinds of platforms, different kinds of video, different kinds of audiences, I think we're living in a different time for people who communicate publicly. There is, as I said earlier, greater opportunity, but also different expectations and certain risks involved in it. As I said, I am not a person who is naturally comfortable being before audiences, which maybe doesn't sound right for a person who's been on television for a really long time, but I'm not naturally comfortable with that. So I would say to you, if you are not naturally comfortable with it, it is really possible to learn how to do it, even if it doesn't necessarily feel right all the time. I tell a story about learning to do live television. And at the risk of being offensive terminally in the digital universe, I'm going to tell the story. This person remains a good friend of mine, so I'm really hoping it's years ago, I was a local television reporter in Atlanta, and I was young, and I was probably about 23, 24, and I was not very experienced at being on live television. I was not very comfortable with it. I wanted to rehearse everything, because the cultural imperative that I had learned is, if you follow all the rules, if you have a well-written script, if you memorize every word on the script, you will be able to deliver this. If you rehearse it enough, you will be able to deliver this live. It turns out not to be the case. I was very stilted. I was very uncomfortable. I could not connect with the camera. I could not connect with the audience. I just couldn't, and I was scared less much of the time. So I went with one of my good friends, who was a cameraman, to do a live, all those live news hits, right? And he is a wonderful, wonderful man. He is also a character. He's a sizable person. He loves his food at all times. So there's this great story about him where like a reporter came running out of the building to jump in the car and race off to a fire or a murder or whatever it is we're gonna end. My friend Al had 2 Burger King Whoppers on the seat. So my friend Paul jumps in the car, sits down, and realizes, yeah. So Paul is now, and they're trying to get to this emergency situation, and Al looks at it and says, Paul's freaking out, and Al says, it's okay. I got another one. I'm not even bothered by that. So he was a person who was aware of his fondness for eating well and living well and being an experience. So we went to do this live shot at a lake, a reservoir. And I was really worried about it. And he said, we'll just, here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna stand at the top. We're gonna talk about the drought here on the lake. You stand at the top, I'll be back here, and I'll back up so you can show how far the lake is. Oh, I've got another camera. We can show how far the lake has gone down if you walk that. So So we practice. And I'm listening in my ear because I can hear the newscast. I'm listening in my ear and they're getting closer and closer. And I'm saying, Al, please, we need to quit rehearsing this and just do it. We just need to get ready to line. We just do. I'm so nervous, please, just don't. And he's pulling on me because we have a long mic. Come on, let's do it again. At the moment that the anchor is telling the anchor story, Joie Chen is live for us. Just before this happens, we are in mud. And Al, trying desperately to pull me, slides so his legs go out from under him. He, because he's a cameraman, cares most about his camera, lifts his camera up so you can see the sky, and he is now lying deep in mud with the camera. And he's rolling in mud because he's trying to make sure that the camera doesn't hit the mud. He's trying to get himself back up, and he knows he's about to be live. And all the nerves that I ever had went away in that moment. Because I am now watching a very large man rolling in mud with a camera attached to it. And I start laughing. And there's nothing I can do. I am hysterical laughing. And all you can hear back in the control room is and all they can see is his picture, which is the sky, doing this. I was hysterical. Finally, he rolls into a position where he can kind of shoot me, but not really well. But it's okay, because I at least made it on TV. And we do our segment, and that is the moment in which I forgot about being on television. And it's very fortunate that it happened early in my career so that I could gain something from that experience. But sometimes it does take something to put you out of yourself, right? To learn to let go of things. I mentioned earlier that I have this long-term memory gap. I'm okay with the short term, but as soon as we get past 5 minutes, because I have literally flushed whatever it is that I'm doing out of my system. I'm very good at compartmentalizing. I don't know whether I'm naturally that way or whether 30 years in television has taught me to be that way, but I can compartmentalize. This is the news I'm doing here. This is the thing that I have to do next. This is somebody yelling in my ear. This is some kid running behind me and screaming, "Hey, put me on TV." I can compartmentalize those things and let them all go. That's a pretty good skill to have developed any way you look at it. But I wanted for some of you being a news anchor. So, I think you would be great at it. Would you mind coming over here?
Sure.
Give us a chair. That's about right. Oh, there's my phone. My phone's on TV. Sorry, Sree. Have a seat. Get comfortable. I want you to do what I do when I'm reading the news. Okay. I want you to start reading.
Which story?
Oh, how about this? I want you to read out loud
To the camera?
to the camera. You cannot stop.
Okay.
But if I ask you to do something, you also have to do.
Okay. All right. U.S. limiting Chinese sales and tech battle. New FCC rules cite risk to security. This article is by Raymond Shane, Paul Mazur, and Jake Nikos. The United States
What are you reading?
China's
That's not
technology
that page.
innovations on Tuesday,
That is not the page you're supposed to be reading.
advancing a new
The next page. Read the next. No, start over again. Start over. We don't have the
of
tape.
interest. No
Start over.
further facts from today's
Wait a minute.
paper.
Where are you going? I didn't tell you to read that.
This production,
This
specialized
production?
work post includes bulletproof vests.
Are you kidding
It's
me?
one of the lone growth
Are you kidding
areas
me?
in the Russian
Oh my
economy.
gosh.
According to the Strategic Analysis Institute at the FBK auditing and consulting firm, documents and
Were you supposed to do
emails
that?
show that
No.
Cambridge
Okay.
Analytics.
You have a good sense of humor. Okay, so this is actually an experience that cable news anchors have all the time, right? This set of if I keep reading this, will they get to me? Or will it? Now, normally we have this with an earpiece in your ear, and you do have, instead of a live person standing next to you, you do have a producer saying, "Are you kidding me? What are you doing? What are you doing?" I've had this experience many times in my life. I wanted to do this with you because I wanted, some of you may experience this in life where you are being interviewed in a, anybody ever done this, like a live remote thing, right? And you're thinking to yourself, why are they asking me such stupid questions? What is wrong with the anchor? Well, partly what's wrong with the anchor is that you're getting a lot of different inputs, right? So there's an experience in that, right? There's an experience in trying to understand how difficult it is to perform when there are a lot of inputs coming at you. And so another thing I'd like you to try is, would you mind doing that?
Hello, Sandhya.
Jay.
Jay, would you mind introducing Sandhya?
Interviewer.
Yes.
Sure. Tell me, Sandra, what do you do?
I run a strategy consulting firm called Impact by Design. We work with nonprofits and entities and help them use design thinking in
And
their
what's
social
valuable?
programs. We think the methodology that we have is useful for nonprofits to make sure that their programs are very centered on the beneficiaries.
Give me a little bit of story about seeing it really work when you had a problem and you dealt with
That's a great question, Jay. Pausing to collect your thoughts and come up with a story. Let's see. We had a client that was really interested in innovating on their programs. And they
But he's
had a number of
actually
different
not
teams
listening
that
to
were
her
not
now.
collaborating with each other. And
He
so
is-
we helped them
she's
to
trying to
break
answer
down
it. She's
silos
wondering,
within
is
their
he listening to me?
organizations
Is he
and
care about what I'm
multiple
saying?
individuals from different groups actually collaborated better with each other, thereby sparking more innovative thought.
How are you going to come up with another question? What
What
is your question?
What is your next project?
Our next project is really to create a demand for this type of methodology, this type of work.
So
and to try
creating
to-
it means you don't have it yet.
That's correct. That's
All right.
correct. There's a lot of needs out there.
So, just on this point, I really think that there's a challenge. And, you know, if you do podcasting, where there are a lot of interviews involved, or remote television interviews, which some of you have experienced already, there is that sense of how do I keep my concentration to ask the next question? I have to listen to what you're saying, and I have to think at the same time. So no matter how much you've written down, you can't control that animal, right? It's the horses out of the barn. You have, I think most people tend to come to interviews like that with a list of questions.
Yeah. Much less compelling.
It's much less compelling.
Person is saying.
You know, you have to be able to listen, right? He has to be able to hear you and take that conversation somewhere else. Have you had to do that?
Have I had to interview in the room? Yeah. That's I guess my preferred mode, but I would always have notes to kind of, especially fill in any pauses.
And it does.
And pivot if there's something specific I know that I want that person to talk about.
Right. When you look at people's resumes in your work right now. So when you look at that, you're like, okay, I'm here. But I'm also thinking, I did get my Starbucks. And I can't, what is she talking about? What is she talking about? So it is still a performance, right? It is still a performance for you to think about how to respond to her. She's really very dull. You know, she was fine on her resume, but now she's sitting in front of you, and oh my gosh, what are we gonna do with her? Yeah, I don't want to so, but I gotta interview you for another 15 minutes because otherwise it's gonna look bad. I need to check all the boxes. So there is a process that we go through that is somewhat lateral to the experience of being in these performance situations. Not entirely, but somewhat.
But it's
how do
gotta
you
be
do that?
engaging. Everything has to be engaging.
Yeah, and how do you make somebody more compelling if they're not already
this is the place where I think that is the communication demand, right? To engage. Think about the way you're sitting, the way you're responding to him. I mean, the body language is kind of a overused term, I think, in a lot of ways. I, for example, think a lot about where you sit. If you're called to be a guest at anything, you know what? I honestly like people who sit uncomfortable. I actually would make you sit with your legs down and forward in your seat, like just on the edge of your seat.
Yes, a little bit.
Right, because the odds are high that if you're that close to the front of the seat, you'll make more eye contact, you won't be able to get away from you, right? You won't be able to, right? Now, Jay's particularly well versed at interviewing people, so you have an advantage, but most people, whether you're performing for a crowd or for an on-camera interview or anything else, they're worried about trying to, those of you in marketing, you've had that experience where you have a message you need to deliver. See people talk to the media, right? You have a message. So you're thinking, deliver this message. I don't care what your question is, right? Because that's what interview coaches teach you to do, right?
But as an interviewer, if the interviewee is not, the example that you gave earlier, how do you as an interviewer make that person more compelling? Or I mean, you just keep trying to throw out more and more interesting questions, or you try to be dramatic, or
Very
how
often,
do you make the person more?
Very often the person is not in and of themselves interesting.
Yeah.
But when someone was talking about rhythm, tone, I come to realize, whoa, she's really smart.
She doesn't.
So I might overdo it to try to force her out of her comfort zone. I might start getting, because I'm probably going to realize she's so nervous about this. This is somewhat awkward for her, but she seems to be a really smart person who knows her stuff. So I'm going to engage. I'm going to try to get you there, because if I'm yelling at you, you're going to yell at me. You ever listen to these radio hosts who seem to be compelling by screaming at you? But it is something of I mean, I'm not suggesting that everybody. I'm just saying that there is something to energizing your own performance to make that person
More,
right. You are being thoughtful and compassionate because of the kind of work that you do. Jay works with people who are between engagements, and so he's talked with them about this. So he's sympathetic. He's super sympathetic, but sometimes that drives down the energy of the whole conversation. And so what I would say is, you need her to be as compelling as she's going to be, for example, when you send her out to an interview, right? So you're trying to make her really interesting because you also need to know more about her.
Absolutely.
And you're going to draw more out of her by making her be one of my favorite job interviews. We were interviewing a young producer, and I said, you have these skills. It's all great. You can do all the jobs. And there was one line in her resume that said she had majored in tuba at Ithaca College, and everything else sort of stopped. And I went, wait, what about the tuba? And she explained why she picked up the tuba. She actually did it to manipulate the college system because she said you're going to major in tuba, and you know that the college tuba major. So that's how she got into college. But it was a good little story, which I would not have realized if I had not seen tuba written there. But I'm trying to get her, either through paper or through interaction, to reveal that one nugget, right? And so, and in a live television interview, the same is true. I'm trying to get you off what PR people have taught you to do, which is get your message delivered over and again, delivered 5 different ways. So people say news people are all trying to play gotcha. But I don't think that's always true. I think sometimes we're just trying to get you to be more interesting.
Yeah.
And so I think for people who ever find themselves in that situation. You know, I did a segment with some of my graduate students the other day, and we were talking about, they were giving a presentation of the thing. And they showed up with a complete list of answers. These are all the things I have to say. That's going to kill you. I mean, it's really going to kill you to be overly scripted. One of the things that has happened with multiple platforms is that we do want people to be more authentic and engaged. We do expect them to be authentic and engaged. And you can't be that if you're hyper-scripted. I look at this in podcasts a lot, listening to podcasts and trying to figure out, does anybody listen to The Daily?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, like on the front end of The Daily, it's very, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And then you get halfway into it and it's like, okay, I'm going to read you the news. It's both of those things, but the part that's going to engage you is that part of the beginning would be, hey!
It's the backstory.
Yeah, it's the backstories to those things. That's what drives people to be interested, both in audience groups and in videos like that. Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, I have one other little, yay! I have one other little game up. Are you from that? Right there. Right, no, still. It's camera. No, you're not right. Oh, okay. You gotta be happy. Do you mind if I touch you? Okay. What's your name?
William?
Hi, William. Hi. Here's what I'm gonna do. Okay. You like this? And now I want you to sing happy birthday. You ready?
Okay.
Go.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Joey. Happy birthday.
You can also presents. Okay. Thank you. All right. So, yay. That was cool, right? But the thing is this. What did you see in him? What did you see in what he did?
It seemed like he was reacting to things you were doing.
Anybody else?
Seemed like to me.
It seemed a little less energy than what I would expect from somebody singing Happy Birthday. I think you see it, but I do it. I move a lot. I move. I'm not very good for a stationary camera, but I move a lot. I think some of that is just nervous energy, and I think you can expel a lot of people who get stuck in a lot of situations. I think they would all be better off if they would just use the chair or walk around. Man, there's going to be all kinds of video drag here. You're going to hate this. But I think that people delivering a TED Talk are more engaging. They can come to. One of the things I think we learned about television news anchors is that back in the day, Walter Cronkite had the big desk. He had the big desk not because he needed a big desk. I mean, would you think he was actually sitting there working at his big desk all day? Clean. There's no way he could be working at his desk. Right? So even today, the anchor man has a big desk because it's supposed to signify to you this is authority on things.
Yeah.
But it's also this barrier to our communication. So I think that we're going to get to a point where there are no more desks. And I actually got rid of the desk that I had at Jazeera. They had given me a giant desk. And I said, I take it away. It's too big. It's whether we saw this money or not. Yeah. But what we're trying to do is talk with the audience, right? And you can't do that if you put a barrier between me and the audience, which in this case is the camera. So I want to reduce all that friction. In the same way that I want you to be on the edge of your chair, on the edge of your seat, because you're so engaged with that, I want you to break down the barrier between. Of course, if you go to be interviewed somewhere, you don't have that much control over that. But I think where you can, people who anchor the news. You ever watch ABC's World News Tonight? So David Muir, who now anchors the program, is like this. Ooh, there's all kinds of different variants. His whole program is this. I actually sit in front of him and make fun of him, but I think it's really important too because This releases your energy. This keeps you at the edge of your seat. I tell anchors all the time, back up. You don't need to be pressed up against a table. The more pressed against a table you are, the less room you have to work with. The further back you are, you're smaller and away. The camera will move to you. The camera can zoom into you, well, except this one for the station, but the camera will move to you. You don't have to move to it. Let it do the work. You need that space. You need the ability to deliver with your energy. You need to be able to connect. You need to be able to reach that audience by looking across there and grabbing a hold. You know, if you watch David Muir, I think he's doing both of those things. I think he's really trying to connect as well as make himself dissipate any nervous energy he has about things. You do have to think a little bit about hand gestures. The Obama one is a good one that Simon was referring to earlier, but there are a lot of people who do this. Is that don't do that one.
Yeah.
If you need an explanation why, you need to Google it, but don't do that one. You know,
What's the Obama one?
the Obama one that Simon was doing earlier, I think is this sort of
Something like that.
power
Yeah.
pyramid sort of, I think some yoga pose that he's doing. Tax reform, yoga pose.
As a can't wait.
Can't point. Some of these things are cultural too. What might be offensive to certain cultures is going to change. When I worked for Al Jazeera, we became conscious of things that were not necessarily what we thought about for normal U.S. domestic audiences. We have to think about them in a worldview. Think about how to use your hands differently there. There are just a lot of things that I think people can do in their performance. Yes, attack the message. And my husband, who went to law school, learned this great line that we use all the time when things seem to be going really bad in some of my live television things. He'll say, remember, boldly asserted, plausibly maintained. Now, what's left off there is doesn't have to be true, doesn't have to be right, and you don't have to believe it. But if you can boldly assert it and plausibly maintain it, then by God, I might have to believe you. I think reporters have this experience a lot, where they're trying to deliver that information in a way that seems both authentic to them and forceful in bringing people into the conversation. I think that in the environment that we have today, everybody is a communicator, right? Every organization is communicating its message, every individual is communicating their brand, their identity. And so I think all these things that used to just apply to those of us who thought we had performance jobs apply in everything. Apply in how you interview for jobs, apply if you do want to do a TED Talk, apply in any kind of environment that you reach out in. So what I would encourage you to do is just to think about those things. Think about the ways that you deliver yourself, even if it doesn't end up being a TED Talk. Maybe it would be useful to video yourself being interviewed, trying to deliver a message to somebody. It could be a small performance. It could be a performance that you give in front of a board meeting. All those things now require us all to be performers and to engage our audiences. And that I think, if I do anything by making William sing happy birthday or making you read without having to pay attention to the distractions around you, it's just to encourage you to think about how to make yourself more of a live performer in this way. So I hope you'll do that, and I take any questions that you have.
I have a question that just occurred to me. So you were talking about the desk being a barrier.
Uh-huh.
But it occurred to me every late night talk show, the host is at a desk, the guests are on a couch. So there's a barrier between the hosts and not between the guests.
But more modern shows, so, these new shows, like the one with all the women, The View.
Yeah.
See these shows?
Yes, they put
But
them.
they put the guest with, right? So I think that there's a little bit, it's a little bit archaic to say, okay, the Johnny Carson desk, the 3 separate chairs, a little bit old fashioned. Where people really get psyched about a lot of the shows is where the host jumps over the desk, goes out in the audience and all this, it's that live engagement. And I think that I personally would think about moving away from the desk format.
So didn't Dick Cavett have 2 chairs?
I think he had 2 or 3.
Yeah, no desk. And
Had a smiling.
Yeah.
I do think that this is more of what we're looking at now.
So they're-
I mean, Colbert, Oprah going in there both desks still.
Yes.
Right, but remember that Colbert built his reputation on that anachronism
Sure.
identity. So it was in certain ways deliberate. I'm not saying people don't do this. I mean, look at all 3 newscasts, big broadcast newscasts still use the big desk. I'm just saying that looking at it as a communicator, I would say, you know what, you don't actually use that desk for anything. Why is that just sitting there? I mean, it may be because people are wearing shorts on the desk. Because people do. I mean, there are people who do this. Sports anchors typically are the ones who do this most often. Go to work wearing shorts and a suit.
So, as the interview subject, is there, if you come into an interview and you can energize yourself some and not be overly scripted, those would all be good things, but are there certain points where the interview subject is almost trying to be too helpful to you? Is there a way to go too far with that?
Yeah, I tend to find that people who are too helpful are people who are trying to deliver a fire hose of information. Like the people who have memorized 72 facts and plan to deliver them in the same way that Simon was talking about in the TED Talk. If you have too much information that you're looking at, I mean, it's really hard to connect with that. And so then I'm trying to break you. I'm trying to get, okay, I know you know those facts, that's really great. Let me help you. Let me get you to the stuff that you care about, not the stuff that you want to read to me, or not the stuff that you've memorized. I know you've worked very hard at it, but please don't.
So when you're approaching, I guess, to translate it from on camera to everyday situations, like you were saying, board meetings and stuff like that, do you have a process of distillation for when you're going to take a complex subject and try to, because I know, you probably have most of your career in like 30-second live shots or, maybe at best a minute 30 package. How do you,
Except for Al Jazeera.
Except for Al Jazeera. But, I mean, what's your process of distillation? Because, some of us get lost in the details and, because I know, like, if I talk to my political friends, that they're like, okay, we don't give him more than 3, and if he's really smart, 5 bullet points. And so we want to really concentrate on those 3 major things. But it's really hard process if it's something that's important to you to distill it into those 3 bullet points.
I think that when we used to think of dead tree news, newspaper news, we were talking about, we used to teach in journalism schools, the inverted pyramid. Most information you need at the top, then gets smaller and smaller, so that if you need to cut it off, you could cut the bottom of the pyramid off. This was the traditional way that we taught journalism, print journalism in particular. The thing that television does is because storytelling is so much a part of the video experience, we're also trying to work with what is the best image. So, this is a conflict in my mind because I understand those people who say, well, TV news is so superficial, you only do a minute 30, you didn't tell my whole story, you didn't do all that. But we are distilling. And there is a process of judgment. I mean, think about just the idea of a newscast. So the CBS Evening News, which I used to work on, is a 30-minute newscast, except it's actually 22 minutes. Right? So you're going to choose something. You're going to choose, then, within that 22 minutes of news, you're gonna choose, are you gonna choose like foreign, domestic, president, Congress, what happened in Pittsburgh? What thing are you gonna choose? And then you're leaving it to the reporting team to decide, okay, this guy's soundbite was good, but hers not so. So I'm gonna cut his a little bit, and I'm gonna try to tell her story, and I'm still gonna try to tell it fairly, but let's face it, she wasn't all that compelling for her. 20 seconds, and you were more, so which one should I do? And am I changing the course of the story by abbreviating her if she wasn't as compelling in doing that?
So in your new thing, how do you get the distance? I mean, like we all have, I mean, like a lot of us have used, you know, have that when it comes to like if I'm shooting photos, I'm photographing the front, whatever, I'm thinking of my babies, you know. But then, you know, when the editor looks at it, you know, I might move the photo that I worked hardest on first, but it's really the 10th best out of what I moved because I know that I worked hard on it. It doesn't make it the best. So how do you, when you're doing like a, you know, because you're transitioning into more of a different role where it's, you know, more different self-promotion, how do you have any tools for translating that kind of editorial distance to your own, you know, your own stuff?
This is also a place where I think it helps to have sort of the ability to let it go. I was interested the other day, a line popped into my head that I wrote when I was in graduate school. And it wasn't particularly, I mean, it was a cute line, but it wasn't, the world was not changed by this line. It had to do with a government program that gave cheese and corn and other sugar and other products because there's a surplus in production. So it was giving it to people who aren't doing it. And I said, the land of plenty is providing too much. Right? So that was the lead of my story. I mentioned this only because, I mean, it literally popped into my head the other day. I don't remember when you wrote that line. But mostly what I need to do is to be able to write it and let it go. There's a Buddhist practice where you lay out a large sand and then you have to blow it away. You know, you spend weeks working on this beautiful sand sculpture and then you have to blow it away. I kind of feel like that. I kind of feel that you have to be able to just make it disappear. In the same way, I think that when you make a mistake, you have to be able to, so the things that are of great beauty to you and the things that were complete failures, you have to look at it in the same way. It's just, that was a moment in time and now I'm on to the next one. And I think performance people, I was really curious about Simon talking about his music performance, because I think musicians, rock musicians, there's so much about being big in their performance on stage that they've got to stir something up. They forget the words of their song, they miss a beat, they come in the wrong time, whatever it is they do. I think that would throw me. I do. I really think that would throw me. I have a friend who was so good at separating himself from his work. Sometimes he sounds stupid. So we'll always remember he went to a protest. People were throwing things, and he did his live shot. And he said the protesters began pelting the media with box and rolls, and he kept going. And I was sitting next to a cameraman, and we looked at each other. Did you say that? He said box and rolls. Did he say that? Did you hear him say that? But he kept going. So he came back from his assignment, and we said to him, how did you keep it together after you said box and rolls? Because if I'd said box and rolls, my next line would have gone. And he didn't know he'd done it. He literally, words came out of his mouth. He knew words, this many words had to come out of his mouth. He thought he'd said rocks and rolls, but what came out was box and rolls. And it's that ability to divorce that side of your brain. Just, I think it's the same thing. It's like you're creative, even if it's your creative baby, you have to be able to let it go. Because otherwise you'll live forever stuck in your sand castle, right? You're going to recreate that one over and over again.
I'm just curious, like in your role now, school,
Yeah.
how, and I'm seeing more and more younger journalists working more in a space, or like full-time roles. How are you?
More adults, do. I mean, more,
Yeah,
people
yeah.
that do this.
How are you advising people? How are you preparing?
Well, you can look at it as a scary thing. Um, It is certainly scary to think, this doesn't come with insurance these days. I don't know when the next check is gonna come in. There's certainly those elements that are scary, but you can also view it as liberating. And what I find is students, because they're not really thinking about things like, oh, I have to have a mortgage payment or insurance or anything else, they're more at liberty to think like that. But I think, or they have parents that might rescue them. I think they do regard it as more liberating. Very few students that I encounter think very much about, I'd like to go work for the big media organization. Young people don't seem to think like that anymore. They seem to think more about, I could go out and do this. I could go and do this project. I'm going to get paid for it somehow. I don't know why they think that. They do. And so they're not as married to their fears, maybe, as those of us of a different generation. So, in a way, I don't want to burst the bubble, but they seem to be much more comfortable with that.
Is that an undergrad program or?
The program that I work with is mostly graduate students. Yeah, but even them, people who've been out in the working world and come back to go to graduate school, even most of those guys are not as stuck on the I need to go to big media or traditional media. Some of them are. Some of them do want that security, but some of them seem much more fluid and relaxed about the process.
So what are their expectations on where their stories and projects are going? Or do they have any?
They are not as bothered as, I was very focused on a TV station and a bigger TV station, network. They're more ambidextrous. I think, they can think about their content being at US News or being on a digital publication that I've never heard of. And they're much more loose about that. They're not as confined in one place. And at least the ones I've met, I've been doing this job for 5 weeks now. So
Okay.
it's a little bit early in the game, but I do think that there's a different ethos for them.
I've heard advice that as an interviewee, it's important to have the command of your subject and also to convey warmth. And I wondered what you thought about that.
Well, I think both of those things are so true. What kind of expertise are you offering there? It's like, if you're a homicide cop, that's going to be complicated.
Yeah, I could say it was in the context of this artistic/activist project that I developed.
So, but that, it's partially approachability, but what would also work there is passion. Right? If I can see that you care deeply about this, which you presumably do, you have expertise, you have command of the facts and all those things. But really, what I want to see is that you're passionate enough about it to go out in the streets. Or do whatever.
Thank you.
Right, well, I think we've done what we can do. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I didn't drill you enough. Because usually when I
You were so nice.
usually when I interview people, it's not like my resume meeting, I'm really the worst that you ask me questions.
Oh, you asked too many questions.
And usually I drill more, so I was like,
Well,
I was
you're
a
not
little
going to
scared.
drill on the first 2 to 3 questions. questions, right? What you did was warming up the interviewee, which is totally normal. You're not gonna
Folks,
just controversial questions
folks,
right away.
we're just gonna wind up in a few minutes, but just wanted to see if there were any questions or anything you wanted to ask Joey. This is a good time. I know you did some questions already, but if there's anything you'd like to know, there's a good opportunity. We've got our captive here. I want to kind of ask you if how you feel about going from the media to like from the administrative side and running this Washington. Tell them a little bit about the Washington program and what you're doing.
So our program is, as I said, for graduate students mostly. We do have one quarter of the year that we take undergraduates as well. But we believe that where we can really benefit the students is having them have practical experience. So they all do practicum, they all do not just internships, but internships where they're producing actual content for various publications. So US News or USA Today or Roll Call or CQ or all kinds of organizations in Washington that are traditional news organizations, but also some newer formats, the Vox Vice formats. I think that we're really looking at how do we prepare another generation of journalists.
Any questions about anything that you'd like to ask her? We've covered a lot. Yeah, you covered a lot of stuff. Can you talk a little bit
Can I
about?
ask you some
Yeah, sure,
questions? I mean, you're going to put people on the spot.
Yeah.
What do you think about this change in the way we communicate? I mean, there used to be sort of the fire hose of information to the audience. The audience didn't really elect it. But even in the sense of giving TED Talks, these are really elected audiences. We're talking about long-tail audiences that are focused on whatever the thing is, whatever that expertise. Do you think that with or where broadcast really becomes obsolete? And is that necessarily a bad thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And my own feeling is that we're seeing now the way how people can get information so different, right? When we were growing up, the way television worked was if you're unhappy, you just throw something at the TV or you complain to the person. Now, when the broadcast is happening, it's like when it's over, it's the beginning of what happens to that story, right? Like people want to give money or help or tell people and all that. So it's a different world. But I think this ability for us, anybody to broadcast anything now is it's the most important thing that's happened in the last 5 years or 10 years.
Do you think broadcast news is dead? Do you think big media is?
No, I don't think so. I think there's
Or
still
dying?
dying. I think it's changing, and people are desperate to try and understand this change. But we lived through the end of AJAM, and that shows you that at the end of the day, it's that you've still got to make money, you've got to have an audience, all of those things you have to deliver. Sorry, Al Jazeera America. And so she had the flagship newscast every night. And for a variety of geopolitical, international reasons, it just went off like that. Any questions? Question? Yes, Deepa.
I just wanted your opinion, both of you, about credibility. With the fake news and with so much political angles that anchors are interjecting their own politics and hidden connections that we have seen lately. I think the credibility, in my mind at least, is declining rapidly. What do you think about it?
I think that this actually goes to what we're just talking about. So, traditionally you had Walter Cronkite, and he told you that's the way it was, and you believed it, right? And so he didn't have really a lot of competition to deal with. And he delivered what we consider a straighter newscast. The environment that we live in today is very driven by commercial interests. It is business. I don't begrudge anybody the understanding that business is business. You got to run a business. Some of you are familiar with DNA Info, which in New York was pretty compelling, in Chicago as well. Sree had a hand in helping them to establish what the kind of content would be for DNA Info. But again, we were looking at how do you redefine audience? So in a lot of cable programs, how they redefined audiences, let's politicize, let's go toward a political angle. On the right and on the left, I would point out. Let's go toward a political angle, a viewpoint. And what happens, I think, is that you get less and less information the more you get on both sides of that aisle. The problem is you can't say to the business part of the thing, look, don't do that. You can't say it. Don't do that. People said to the founder of DNA Info, that's not right that you're taking away our news source, our objective local news source. Well, you know what? It's business. And he put a lot of money into it, and he cut it off at the knees. Jazeera America, there were a number of geopolitical reasons, but one reason was also that we did not generate audience numbers that our boss thought justified our existence. Now, we could argue that if you'd given us a little longer, like 2.5 years, then maybe we could have grown it. But with regard to how this plays out in the content that we're looking at today, and what journalists will be doing in the future, one thing I would say is rather hopeful sign is at our journalism school, the vice journalism program. At our journalism program, the applications for undergraduates were up 23% last year.
Look at Laura's face.
Wow, right? Wow. So on one side of you thinks, oh my gosh, do they not understand this is a dying business? And on the other hand, clearly they care about it. I mean, they've electively said, and we have had a long, it's not like our reputation is somehow changing, that's led to an influx of students. This is a lot of 17 and 18-year-old people saying, hey, the news is important. We want to learn how to do the news. Now, some of those people will still be agenda-driven. We may be creating more agenda-driven people as well. But clearly, young people, we went through a period in news, I'm sure some of you remember, when we were talking about how apathetic young people were. It wasn't that long ago. Oh, they're apathetic, they don't care, they're not watching our shows, they're not reading our newspapers, they're not blah, blah, blah. I'd say that is less true now.
Yeah.
I'd say that this is a generation, I mean, look at it, look at those kids who came, I live in Washington, look at the kids who came out for this latest protest. My son is a senior in high school, and, actually, he was excited that I was coming up here today because he knows who Simon Tan is. Because he followed the legal case. It was a Supreme Court case. Do you remember being 17 years old and having what's going on in the Supreme Court? And this was a fairly, not obscure case, but it wasn't exactly a case that got the most attention from the Supreme Court. But a 17-year-old kid would actually sit there and follow it and say, oh yeah, I know who he is. You're going to meet him? Cool. Hey, Mom, you're not usually that cool, but... so stuff like that. So I think it's actually a good time. I actually think for journalists working in Washington, this is the hardest period ever. I have had reporters call me and say, I can't do this anymore. White House reporters call up. This is exhausting. It's not even a right, left. It's not attack. It's not that. It's just exhausting. The amount of stuff that's happening. I reported in the George W. Bush administration for CBS News. And whatever the politics was, I was really fond of George W. Bush because he closed up shop every day at like 4:30 in the afternoon. Not work on the weekends. Trump, Mr. Trump, whatever you think about his politics, works all the time. There is no off button. So information is coming out. I mean, you have to be watching it every hour, literally every hour of the day, because you don't know what's going to happen. There are no more weekends. But as hard as that is for people, I actually think that it's good for reporters. I mean, it's exhausting for them, I get that. But it's forcing them to work harder, challenging alternative facts. It forces them to be better researched, better focused, more prepared every time they walk in the press room. Because they're gonna hear something and they're gonna think, well, maybe that's not right.
Do you think Trump's gonna kill the access? You know, there's a whole generation that came in with Clinton. They were so worried about their access, they wouldn't actually be more like stenographers. Do you think Trump's gonna kill the stenography cult?
Well, maybe, I hope so.
That's not a bad thing.
It's not a
It's not
bad
bad,
thing.
I'm not saying that.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing.
And also what is Jay Rosen called? The view from nowhere.
When W was in the White House, I actually thought we were kind of lazy. You know, obviously I liked being more on the White House lawn, that was pretty dope. But on the other hand, I don't think we worked as hard as we could work. I don't think we challenged authority as much as we could or should have. It was just too easy to be able to get the sound bite, get the other sound bite, da 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 da. And, you know, there might be different views, but you weren't constantly looking to see whether we were talking alternative facts or the ordinary kind of facts.
Let's do a couple questions.
Yeah, no, well, I just want to follow up or kind of stay on this credibility, kind of in this general credibility, because one of the things that I think is very interesting, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Edelman Press Barometer. But the thing that there were some conflicting facts in the press barometer that they released in Davos. So unfortunately, media credibility and trust in media is at an all-time low. Globally, this isn't just a U.S. phenomenon, it's globally. Of course, they're in very good company because also business, government, and NGOs are also all at an all-time low because we're in a trust crisis right in the world. But what was interesting to me was, so media is at an all-time low, but trust in journalists is going up. And the other thing that declined pretty dramatically was trust in people like me, which I kind of take as a social media commentary. I mean, maybe about, you know, for a long time, because, you know, particularly as a marketer, word of mouth marketing and getting other people to be an advocate is like the best thing, right? Because you can get going for you. But now there seems to be skepticism of people like me. Journalists are up, but media's an all-time low. I just wondered if you two would comment. I mean, I think that's a very interesting commentary on the Times. Now that was in January, so who knows where we would be right now?
Things changed since last week.
Exactly.
But it's the same thing, right? It's like there's a crisis in journalism, except, you know, 23% more 17 journalism in college. Why would that be?
Well, they're respecting journalists more than
Right,
the media,
exactly.
right?
And I think that that's the case. I mean, or at least they're more curious about the possibilities. They want to participate more in the environment. I actually think audiences overall are more participatory in that sense. Now, some people say, well, that's because people on the right felt isolated in previous media environments, and now they at least feel that they have a voice, and so they're coming out and speaking and whatever it is. But I would like to say that, you know, it's a time where there's so much more engagement on all kinds of levels. It's not purely political. We've seen this in V2 and the kind of protests we've seen around the country. Yeah. I think people are more engaged, and that frankly is a good thing. People care more about that, even where there might be sort of a kind of knee-jerk sort of, oh, well, you know, you can't trust the media, but I can trust this report and I can trust that report, but you can't trust the media. You know, I think somehow we've managed to get both of those things going, and maybe I'm naive and overly optimistic, but I actually think that that's good for engagement. I think that's good for audiences. It may be complicated for marketers, but I think that it's actually a good thing for us as a society.
Let's do a couple more questions. I just wanted to answer the question, if I may answer the question that you had asked about different brands, and I know you also, a couple of you had the same question, like, what do you do about, so I'm going to go back and think about and talk about books. When people get their first book, and I worked with authors for many years, helping them get online, and I hand-built and forced a website onto Fareed Zakaria, Amitav Ghosh, Samuel Friedman, all these people who didn't understand why they needed a website, and they're of course amazing writers. And I used to say to them, the instinct now is like you have a book about, your book is about eating apples is good for you. You'll want to build eatingapples.com as a website. And what I tell people is, don't, unless that's the only book you're ever going to write, don't build a brand around this niche book. No matter how big or how successful, anything it's going to be, build it around you so that you can be 7 different things. You can be the toad person and the gardening person, but also the political person, because people can process that you are multiple things. And because trying to build 5 different brands and maintain the URLs of them and the Twitter handles is just too difficult.
Who was it that had so many Twitter handles?
Yeah, sir. And I mean, it's I think instinctually it's the right thing. We should compartmentalize, But I think that the world.
I have too many, even just social media to follow.
Right.
I have too many platforms.
Right. But at least what I'm saying is, but you should be Joie Chen on the ones you're on, and you should be good on and be only on the ones you're good on. Don't have to be on 12 different platforms. Like many of you have asked me, like, why am I not doing more Snapchat? Because I just cannot find the time to do it. And I'm specializing in the ones I love, and I'm deliberately adding more, both LinkedIn and Instagram, because those I see growing and being of more importance. But we all have to find the places we want to be. So my advice to at least the 2 people who have this question about multiple, not personalities, but multiple. Yeah. Like, how do we? You're the brand that you build, and we have a friend named Patricia Kitchen, who many of you know, and she always says, like, your bio on your, on LinkedIn, how you have each title, your job title, but you have a section called summary and headline. In the job title, you have to be very literal about what it is. You have like the boring title. We all have boring titles. But in the bio and in the summary and the headline, like, that's where you sing, right? Like, so instead of saying deputy vice editor of blah, 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 you say, storyteller. Like, that's where you reflect your best aspiring, aspirational you can be there. And in your Twitter feed, it's perfectly normal to say, tweeting about books, shoes, and police, or whatever, it's an unusual combination. But as long as you tell them, if you do have 3 things you tweet about, tell them you have 3 things you tweet about. Trying to fit them all into 3 different accounts, I think it's going to be too hard. And people follow you, and then you're interested, and then they'll unfollow you after a while. That's okay. But you don't have the time or the ability to maintain these multiple, personalities. It's too much work, just like in real life, right? So I would suggest go simpler and clearer. One of the great sayings that I've taken with me in this digital world was from John Huey, who was editor-in-chief of Fortune magazine. And he said that when he was in the magazine world and the print world, it was very important to be clever, right? You've got to have a clever headline, clever titles to get people to grab it off the shelf. And he said that in digital, clear is the new clever. Clear is the new clever. Just try to be like more simple, be more direct, be more clear. People follow you and care about what you're doing, and be as direct as you can. And that is my suggestion. Doesn't mean you can't have 2 brands, but deliberately trying to maintain 2, 3, 4 brands, and people will lose. And also, as we do with each of these, we get very clever in the title, and we use a Z instead of an S, and use we drop the E, and we like all these words where
no vowels.
No vowels. And I mean, it all looks good to us, but maintaining it on the long run. And I learned this even in my new life as I'm trying to do this new life where I'm teaching and consulting, and if you've seen my schedule, it's kind of overpacked, and part of it, I was trying to prove there is a business here, and somebody said, how's your business? And I said, it's an insult to businesses to call what I do a business, but at the end of Q1, I can tell you that there is a business here, and there are people interested, and folks like you very kindly participating and paying for my kids' food. But what I've also learned, as somebody said to me, is, my God, he looked at the schedule and he said, if you're successful, you have to do this for the next 20 years, right? This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And that means instead of doing 30 events in 3 months the way I did, spread out. You'll see starting in the summer and fall, it's much more spread out, much more deliberate, picking and choosing. And so that's what I've learned also, like do fewer things. And right now Facebook is undergoing all this turmoil, but one of the best things about Facebook that has taught me is this sign they have in every office of Facebook. It's just 3 words: focus on impact. Focus on impact. And I remember Marco and I, we tried to make a sign because impact is also the name of a font, right?
Yes.
So like focus on impact and saying like, stop doing so many things, right? And I've also learned that in this thing, like especially if you're trying to make money, there's a way in which you do fewer things, but do them better. Like one of the things I've learned is that every event I do needs its own entire marketing plan, as if nothing else existed, that you have to focus. And I didn't realize that. And so just doing all this stuff, and a lot of it was willy-nilly, like stuff was happening, but you've got to concentrate, and everything needs its own marketing plan.
What do you mean
and
exactly
effort.
by that?
No, that means you have to treat it, you can't guarantee people are going to care about what you do. And some of you have heard me talk about this, like one of my clients that I'm helping is a guy who gave $50 million to his university, and the press didn't care. $50 million. Why? Because in academic philanthropy, that's nothing. Because people are giving Harvard and Columbia like $300, $400 million. So $50 million is not a story.
We would take it.
Yeah, you would.
I'll be very nice.
You'll be very nice. But no, but that's the world, right? Like that's the world. So then we have to make a story out of it. So what I'm partly saying is like you have to grab the person and sit them down and say why this matters, why you have to care about it. It's like even look at this. We had a great workshop. Could we have sold an extra 20 seats? We could have, but that would have meant me focusing and sending it to these lists and offering discounts, and that's same thing now. Social media weekend's coming. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to have the best one ever, but selling tickets is going to be hard because there's also one of the things I've realized since we first did this 10 years ago, more competition, right? The New York Times is now in the events business, competing with me, and the Atlantic and the Code. I mean, just pick everybody's now in the events business. Before, universities were the only ones in the events business. Now we're all in the events business. So trying to sell a ticket for $200 is not easy. And people, some of you who've taken my classes, I talk about this thing called the Facebook Legacy Contact, which is the section of Facebook that allows you to give a person access to your Facebook when you die. And it's something that's macabre, but really important because I had 2 funerals that I had to organize in 2016, one for a 67-year-old and one for a 14-year-old. And both of them, the families at their worst moment, that moment was made worse because of social media and the fact that they didn't have Facebook Legacy Contact. So I beg people everywhere I go, please set this up. And everybody says yes, yes, yes. And almost nobody does it. People won't do things that are good for them, right? Like people won't do things that I say, like imagine your mom or your wife or your daughter life being made worse after you die at that moment because of the digital world we live in now. And they say, yeah. And they won't do it. Or they don't believe it's important. So this is the world we live in now, where we've got to convince people that this is interesting and important. One of my clients is called the Global Teacher Prize. We give $1 million to a single teacher somewhere in the world. And you won't believe how hard it is to get attention to this. Bill Gates is involved and all these, there's so much work that needs to be done for anything. It's not the way it used to be, Some of you remember the Seinfeld episode where they're trying to get him to wear a puffy shirt on the Today Show, because if you can just get on the Today Show, your business is built and excellent. And what happens? He goes on the Today Show, nobody cares, right? I've been on the Today Show so many times, but none of you have ever seen me on it. Nobody in my family's seen me on it. Like, that's the situation we're in today, or CNN or anything, right? Like the other day I was on Bill Ritter's show, and it was great, but who's watching? Nobody has time to watch this. So everyone's creating all this content. We need some consumers.
I think that the content, though, it's the social platforms actually. Yes, you have the legacy media, but really it's the bite-sized parts of social platforms that put on social platforms.
So one thing to help you with your schedule,
Right.
I went to a meetup last night for an online learning platform called Thinkific, and where you can create your own courses, and it could be a course on social media, or it could be a course on baking, or whatever it is. And so I'm just thinking about like how much content Sree has, and he can make this amazing course and then spread it out to the world. It doesn't have to be only people in New York or only people in the 30 countries.